Okay, so I think we're talking about James tonight, right? Yeah.
Indeed.
So let's
Don,
look.
don't say James who. Come on.
Let's
Which
look at
James?
which James. Yeah, this one. Let's go to James 3. Let's look at the passage, and I'll go ahead and read that. So it's verses 13 to 18, and I'm reading from the ESV. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. That's our passage for tonight, maybe coming up, maybe next week too. I was really impressed when I read through this and started thinking about it, about how it ties into everything that's gone before. Really is coming to a culmination. And I wanted to look at some of the earlier passages, and we'll start with those, and then we'll get back into this passage that kind of mention these things. So if we go back to James in the first chapter, we have verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Then he says how he should ask without doubting, asking in faith. He's returning again, as he has a couple of times now, back to the source, or to the subject of wisdom in the passage we just read. And in the passage he just read, it starts out with kind of a rhetorical question, at least in the ESV, who among you, or who is wise and understanding among you? I think the NIV has it as a statement. Right, who's got the NIV? Mom? No? It's a question?
It's the question you just quoted. I think you misquoted the ESV.
Probably did.
Who is wise and understanding among you is the NIV.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah.
so the ESV says, who is wise and understanding among you? Yeah, ESV also says that.
Okay.
So does anybody have a Bible that has it as a statement? What do you got, Don?
This is verse 5 we're talking about?
Yeah, verse,
Yeah.
no, verse, I'm sorry, not verse 5. We're talking about chapter 3, verse 13.
Oh,
Oh.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to lose everybody.
that old thing.
Chapter 3, verse 15.
Verse 13.
13. Yeah. Who is wise and understanding among you?
Okay, so nobody's got the statement. That's interesting. I had looked at that in several translations, and I thought that some of the standard ones had statements instead of the question. Anyway, the point of James asking it is because he's just gone through the section about teachers. Don't many of you be teachers, and the qualifications. Now people are going to be judged by their words. And when he gets to verse 13, he is not seriously asking which of you is wise. He's actually saying, so you've said you're wise, but let me see your wisdom. You've been standing, you put yourself forward as being wise. You put yourself forward as being a teacher, but don't just say that you know these things, which they don't, but actually show it, right? That's the second part of verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. So he asks a question and he says, you're only qualified to say you're wise if you're actually showing that you're wise by your life. And
Hmm.
so he's not asking actually for them to stand up and say, yes, I'm wise. He's saying you've said you're wise, and but you have to show it. And this has been, go ahead, Mom.
Would you read the ESV again, that second half of that verse?
By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom.
Hmm. I like the NIV.
Hmm.
I like it better, actually.
Okay, what does it say?
Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom.
So what is it that you like about that more than the ESV?
I like the good life. I just like the way it's phrased. It's the deeds that are done in humility. I don't think yours has the word humility.
It
The
doesn't.
the humility that comes from wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I like that better than the meekness of wisdom, if that's what yours said.
Yeah, mine says the meekness of wisdom, right? Kind of a confusing, not obvious.
And whether I like it better or not is irrelevant. To me, it's easier to understand.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I was thinking of where is it? Huh. I guess I was misremembering. Hmm. Okay, so I thought there was I thought I had read a translation that combined the question with the answer, or the question with the second part, and just made it all a statement. Whoever is wise among you, let him show it. You know, that type of a thing. But James is continuing on his approach, which has been, faith is not just words. Faith is actually shown and made evident by action. That's what he's going to be talking about here. So let's go back to chapter 1 again. We're still going to look through the passages that are kind of leading up to this. Chapter 1, verse 17 says about the source of wisdom. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. So this passage is also about wisdom is a gift. Again, just like in verse 5 of chapter 1, wisdom is a gift, and it is a good gift, and it comes from God. And he is the place you would get wisdom from. In verses 19 to 25 of chapter 1, James talks about receiving the word with meekness, and you might have humility or gentleness in your translation in verse 19, or in this section. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness that God requires. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. This is the first time in the book that the word meekness, which is translated in some places in your different translations as humility or humbleness, or maybe even gentleness, shows up. And then it shows up again in the passage we're looking at in 3:13, where he says meekness of humility. It's
Yeah,
a hard.
John Wayne put it a little bit differently.
What did John Wayne say?
He said, speak low, speak slow, and don't speak too much.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well,
Just
John Wayne only said things that people wrote down for him and paid him to say. So,
Well, that does sound better than fill your hand.
With iron.
Yes. And then some bad words describing the guy who's getting the order.
Hmm.
Oh my.
So in the passage we just read, we're to receive the word with meekness, and then it goes on and says in chapter 1, verse 22, that we're to be doers of the word, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. So again, this is related to the passage that we're reading today, James 3:13 forward, because James is saying, don't just say you're wise, show it. You don't have to tell me you're wise if I can see it. Right? If you have to tell me, you're not wise, basically. And then James 2:1, he talks about partiality. And he's already mentioned this when he talked about God in verse 5, who doesn't play favorites, but who gives to everybody generously. But now in chapter 2, verse 1, my brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. If you turn the page over to chapter 3 again and look at the description of heavenly wisdom, which is in verse 17. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. So he's brought up partiality now the third time. The first time it was God is impartial. The second time is you should be impartial. And then the third time now is that one of the characteristics of godly wisdom is impartiality. And then he goes on in chapter 2, verse 14 to 16. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. And again, he's talking about throughout the book and in the section about wisdom that we're starting to look at, he's talking about visible faith. That the point of following Christ is not just to say you have faith, but to actually possess real faith, so that your faith will be seen by your works. And so your wisdom will be seen by your works. It's the same principle, because the wisdom that we receive from God is a product of the faith that we have.
In other words, walk the walk.
Walk the walk, and
Walk the talk.
walk the talk, and walk the walk. Let me see. Where's the part where I can't believe I don't see this, where James says you believe there is one God, good, but even the demons believe.
Oh, verse 19, 2:19.
2:19. Thanks.
Hey, Steve's coming.
All right, Steve. He's coming in. Connecting.
Okay.
Evening, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Hi there.
Hi. No video tonight?
Well, hang on a second. I just got to unbury my laptop.
Well, welcome. Glad you could join us.
Thank you.
So I'm just going through some of the passages that lead up to where we are tonight. If you had a chance to look at the handout I sent out, we're in chapter 3, verse 13 to 18. kind of just
And
going through
really,
some
nice
earlier.
handout.
Thank you. And even though there's typos and some stuff that's wrong with it, it still is pretty good. Yeah, I know. Shocking, isn't it? So it's just looking at chapter 2, verse 14 to 17. I just read that. Let me just read the next couple. And this passage is about what we just read, was about real faith shows itself. And don't just say you have faith. And this relates to the passage about wisdom, because James's position is, don't just say you have wisdom, but show you have wisdom. Show you're wise. But to continue in James 2:18, someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. James mentions more than once that there's demonic counterfeits to the Christian faith and to the Christian graces. This is the first mention where the demons, they believe the right thing, God is one, but they are not, their faith is not anything like Christian faith. And so James brings it up, and he's concerned to say, basically, to underscore the point that you can have a counterfeit faith. You can say you believe, but not actually have the life of faith, and that faith is counterfeit, and it's just as good as the faith a demon has. It's demonic. And he says the same thing about wisdom. When we look at the passage again that we read earlier in 3:13, he talks about demonic wisdom. He says demonic wisdom in verse 14. So I'm looking at chapter 3, verse 14. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. So he is contrasting there, again, bringing up the point that there are demonic counterfeits, and that it's a serious matter, and that they need to examine the fruits. They need to examine themselves and the fruits of their so-called wisdom. What is their motivation? What is the outcome? He goes on to explain that if you're acting out of jealousy and selfish ambition, then what this brings is division and destruction. And of course, this is demonic. And so he makes that point a couple of times in the letter about counterfeits.
I think of it as being the difference between faith in the word and simply acknowledging the word.
Yeah. Yes, Mom.
I have a note written in my Bible on the top of the page that is James 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Were those notes there when you bought it?
No, these are notes I wrote as the result of hearing a sermon.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
If your life doesn't produce fruit, then you aren't connected to the vine and your faith is not real.
That's a good summary. Yeah, very true. That's and that is apparently a very real danger, a very real problem, because it's not only addressed here, but it's addressed. First John is about that. Jesus talks about it. It comes up repeatedly. I mean, the whole reason that we have exhortations in the letters to live out the life of faith is because we naturally are completely reluctant and so easily deceived as to our actual, is our faith real or not. So there's a continual emphasis on letting the fruit of the Spirit actually be seen. And not that, we're supposed to self-generate any kind of new life, because that again is also self-seeking, right? But that we are to trust Christ and then do what he says. So he says, love your neighbor. And we're supposed to trust Christ and then love our neighbor, even if we don't feel love for our neighbor. We're just supposed to do it. And then the confirmatory feelings sometimes come later or not at all. But so James's point is, what you summarized there really well. If you're not connected to the vine, then you won't produce fruit. And so if you're not producing fruit, or if your fruit is dividing the church and puffing up, you're being puffed up because of it and all of that, then this is not godly fruit. Everybody produces fruit. And in James's view is not, he doesn't have neutral, there's no neutral fruit. It's godly or it's demonic. And and there's no neutral wisdom. James's view is there are two kingdoms. And that's it. There are no three kingdoms. It's not like the United States, the kingdom of Satan, and the kingdom of Christ. One of those doesn't count.
Guess which one?
Just guess. Right. There is no struggle in the Bible between God and the United States. The struggle is between God and the devil. Right.
Yeah.
And so the last thing that James says right before he gets to our passage is just the first 12 verses of chapter 3. I'll go ahead and read that too. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing, my brothers. These things ought not to be. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening, both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. So again, he brings up there is a demonic counterfeit to speaking rightly, and there is words that are not spoken in accord with biblical truth are demonic. Using our tongue for spreading out things that are not in accord with biblical truth is a bad thing. Yes, Don.
Yeah, I just had a question of clarification. Gary might be able to help me. What is correct? This ought not be so, or this ought not be?
I think it ought not to be or ought not to be so. Now, which verse is that?
That's the end of verse 10, at least in the NRSV.
Oh, mine says, the Holcomb says, these things should not be this way. I think that's a little easier to read.
Yeah.
These things should not be this way. That other, it might be technically correct, but it sounds kind of awkward, and I can see why it sort of bothers you. It's not as, I don't think it comes out as smooth, but this is, these things should not be this way. And I think that's a little smoother, even if the others are technically.
So you're rewriting the Bible now.
Holcomb did it.
Well, I wouldn't say they're rewriting it. We have a lot of different translations. So
Yeah, that's, I don't know. I'd be careful with that, Don. I was
Joking.
for a moment there, I was tempted to accuse Jane of adding to God's word, but I decided not to say that because I had my Bible's all full of marks.
All right. Sorry about the digressing.
That's a fair, in the New American Standard, which is so literal, which is much more literal, there are times some of the passages in that are kind of tough to read because it's so literal. The other language, it just doesn't, it doesn't come out the same.
More so than the King James?
I'd say so. The King James, you just got to get used to all those thous and ye's and all that stuff. But
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. It's the way that the language is used more so than the words that are used.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to comment that the more literal translations that try to retain the same word order, not just the word meaning, but the word order. And so those are your New American Standard and your ESV to some extent. And the word order, especially in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word order is very different from English word order. And if you want to see a difficult time in reading, go say to Bible Gateway and pull up an interlinear translation of the Hebrew and try to read it the way it's laid out in Hebrew and see if you understand it. That's
Don't you first have to be able to read Hebrew?
well, with an interlinear, they're going to put the English word below the Hebrew text, but they're going to keep the same order.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? He provides stuff like that.
Yeah, it's great. So one hint though, when you read Hebrew, you probably all know this. It's the opposite direction than English, so it's right to left. It's not going to make any sense either way in an interlinear, but it makes more sense going right to left.
Well,
It'll teach you to go back. It'll teach you to go back to what you were reading, Don.
That's right. You'll really appreciate whatever it was you had. You go, wow, I'm so glad that God has blessed us with an English translation. Yeah.
And some very good ones.
So my I spent a lot of time thinking about meekness and doing work on that particular word, because I thought the way the passage is laid out, that this meekness, whatever is being talked about, is really important. And I found out that it's a difficult word to translate into English, and that it has some nuances that don't come across. One of the common ways to translate it is humility or humbleness, but that doesn't carry with it everything that should come across. And sometimes gentleness is used, and gentleness is probably, not even as good as humility. And meekness isn't very good, because in English, meekness, we know that meekness is a virtue in the Bible and that it's a good thing, but in our culture, meekness is not good. Meekness means weakness. Meekness means you can be walked all over and that you should just be a doormat. And it means somebody who's not assertive and all of that kind of thing in a negative way.
Yeah, it has connotations in English.
Yeah, and so it doesn't serve, it's not really that great. We don't have a great word, is what the point is. We don't have a great word in English. And I think it's really good that the translators stick meekness in there, because when you read it, you go, well, I wonder what that means, because it doesn't mean what I think it means. It obviously can't mean that. And then you want to then do some work in it. And it turns out to be a really, really central word in this text.
So you're saying that
also,
they selected meek because they couldn't come up with anything better.
right. They had a choice, right? They could use an existing word or they could make up a word. Sometimes people make up words. I mean, that's how we get new words. But they didn't do that.
So
So
where do you see the word meekness? I'm looking at a Holcomb, I just don't see it.
yeah, see, so there you go. So do you have gentleness or humility or humbleness in verse
Well, yeah.
13?
Yeah, I have wisdom's conduct with wisdom's gentleness.
Right. So here's the ESV. The second part of this: by his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. And then somebody has the NIV. Mom, can you read that?
The
let
meekness
him
of
show-
wisdom. That is very interesting, because it kind of shows you that the way it's used there is not the way that we're used to it being used.
Mm-hmm.
What,
You say that the meekness of wisdom.
Yeah.
what did you have, Jane?
So the NIV says, let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom.
Right. So humility sounds like, well, I think, yeah, at least when I would have read that, if I read that and I was thinking about what is the humility that comes with wisdom, it would be about, mostly about not assertive or servant-like attitude. And,
To me, it would be not boastful.
not boastful. Okay, not boastful. Right,
Not saying I know it all.
and that would certainly fit with verse 14, right? Where at the end of the ESV, at least, it says, "Do not boast and be false to the truth." And so you would get the idea by reading about humility that its contrast is pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe meekness, the contrast would be, I don't know, arrogance.
Maybe submissiveness.
Maybe which?
Submissiveness. I hate to say it. Being submitted.
Being submitted.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's included, I think, in the idea here of meekness and humility, and then gentleness. Of course, all of these have different kind of flavors, and they kind of touch upon what's actually being said there. Go ahead, Don.
I switched over to see what the King James says, and well, King James is kind of weird, because
He was kind of weird, yeah.
because one of the things I'm noticing here is that, for example, in verse 12,
Okay.
can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? ? Either a vine, comma, figs? ? So that no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. And the thing that's unusual is that as the sentence continues after the question mark, the next word is not capitalized.
Yeah, it's a two-part,
Anyone-
two questions in one sentence.
Yeah, they end with a question mark, and then they continue on with small e of either a vine. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. So Gary,
Yeah.
Gary's our resident grammarian, and he might know something about the use of question marks. Do question marks always signify a full stop, or can they be used as semicolons?
That's an excellent question. Let me put on my green eye shade here. I don't know that I've ever seen that before, but I think it would be appropriate. I'd say just offhand, particularly where you got a little bit of poetic license and yeah. They're much, if it's a mistake, there are much more egregious ones being made all around us. I don't have a problem with that.
And then the end of verse 13 does say, well, 13 says, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you, ? Let him shew out a good conversation, his works with meekness of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. So conversation in the 17th century did not refer to speaking, but demeanor and deportment. And there's another 17th century word. How you carried yourself.
Yeah, deportment.
Yeah, deportment. Everybody knows that word.
It used to be on report, on student report cards sometimes.
Something you were graded on.
Hey,
yeah. Your outward action.
Yeah.
Conduct, which is how ESV translates it.
Nice
So
exams, but bad deportment.
Yeah. So then, so returning to meekness, gentleness, humility, what does it mean and why is it important? It's obviously important by its place in the sentence, by its place in what James says there. By his good conduct, let him show his works in the blank of wisdom. Whatever the blank is really important. So,
what do you know about the Jubilee Bible 2000?
I don't know anything about it except it was printed in 2000 and it's a revision of the King James.
Seems to be, because it does the same thing with this putting in question marks in a sentence, but not using it to end the sentence.
Yeah. So I'm glad that I've actually done that when I've written some things too, and I've seen it in hymns and things like that also, but that's poetry. But so I wouldn't have thought it was weird, but it is interesting that they did that.
Yeah.
So let's look at Matthew 11:29. I'm interested to hear how different translations handle this passage, Matthew 11:29. So now we're actually on the first sheet of the handout that I sent out.
Page 1, you mean?
Page 1. So we want to see a couple of instances where people have said they were meek, and then we want to define what meekness is. And then we want to go back and look at the James passage. So Matthew 11:29 ESV says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This is Jesus speaking. I'm sure you all knew that. Who's got something different than gentle and lowly in heart?
The Holman has gentle and humble in heart.
Gentle and humble. That's interesting.
So does the NIV.
NIV, gentle and humble.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have anything else? Anybody have meek?
I have meek and lowly in heart.
Mm-hmm. And is that is the King James or the New King James?
King James, yeah.
King James.
King James.
Yeah. So Jesus identifies himself as meek and lowly of heart, and it's interesting that that in some of the other translations they use gentle and humble, which are used as alternate words to translate meek, and so it's almost like saying the same thing. Gentle and humble. Jesus says he is meek, and he goes on, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." But what does he mean? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. You'll remember in the Beatitudes, Jesus starts out by saying, "Blessed are the meek," right? And we read, "Blessed are the gentle, blessed are the humble," things like that. But it's the same word. Let's look at Numbers 12:3. And for those of you who are not proofreading very well, It should say numbers instead of number 12 to be there.
Number 12? Number 12?
Number 12, now serving.
All right, gotta throw something out. I just discovered this in passing. Has anyone ever heard of the King James Bible Purple Letter Edition?
Purple letters. No, I have not. You should get one. Yeah.
Well, it's available on the
Mom.
Bible
Yeah.
Hub.
So I just discovered something in passing too, because when you made reference to the Beatitudes, I went back and looked at it.
Yeah.
And the NIV says, blessed are the meek, but I have my little sermon notes.
Oh,
written
good. Okay.
That meek means power under control.
I did read that in a couple of one definition. I did read that. I think actually it's attached to the handout.
Oh,
But yeah, I wasn't actually sure what power under control meant, but I thought, okay, it's like that. Maybe that means something to other people, but I
to
remember.
me, it means you have all power, but you don't misuse it.
Yeah. So I know where it comes from. It was from a definition of talking about Jesus was not meek because he was weak, but because he had all of the power available to him. And then it went on and said power under control. But I still thought, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm still not sure about how to figure that out. I remember one time when I was reading through a dictionary, I'd come across a word I didn't know, and it would say, go see this other word. So I go to the other word, and then it would say, then it would use the first word in the definition of
To
the other
define-
word.
Yeah.
Yeah, to define itself. You just go, I don't know
Circular.
what this circular. I have no idea what this means. So number 12:3. Now the man Moses, I'm reading the ESV, the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And people read that and they laugh about it. They think, how could a humble person write that?
Does anybody have that in parentheses?
Not I. Some people. Okay. Does anybody have any other word? I have
Humble.
meek, humble. Yeah,
Yes, humble.
humble.
Yeah, this Purple Letter Edition of the King James says, in parentheses, verse 3, now the man Moses was very meek above all the men who were upon the face of the earth.
Yeah, I think the parenthesis is appropriate there because what the setting is that Moses is being challenged by Miriam and Aaron, and his authority is being challenged. And basically, by saying that the man Moses was meek, is what they're saying is that Moses he's not the type of person who would have defended himself. And in this setting, in this chapter, it is God who defends Moses. And so it's an explanatory note that's put in. The parentheses indicate that it's, to me, it indicates that this is an explanation of Moses's reaction or lack of reaction to what's going on.
Kind of an aside.
Yeah, kind of an aside. And then, people ask, atheists and whatnot, they ask, how could a humble person write that? You say Moses wrote this. I didn't say Moses wrote that. I said Moses wrote the Pentateuch, but Joshua may have edited it or put in explanatory notes, or because you come across things in the Pentateuch that say, oh, and that city is still there to this day, which means that somebody after it was originally written went in or that name of that city has changed. You see notes like that too. So
Good boss.
yeah, so nothing big, but Moses is called meek here. And he's called the standard of meekness, basically, the most meek or humble person. Paul doesn't call himself meek, but he gives us the same type of attitude of a meek person in 1 Corinthians 9:19, which I wrote out on the outline, but I still like to go to it.
Corinthians 9:19.
1 Corinthians 9:19. Paul writes, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." And he goes on to the Jews, I become, like a Jew or a Jew in order to win Jews. The point that Paul is making here and the relation to meekness is this. The meek person is a character. One of the characteristics of a meek person is that he is concerned with the betterment of others, of the other that he is dealing with, and to the point where his or her assertion of their rights is not important. It's not even thought of. So when you think of Jesus, Jesus says that, Jesus is the creator. He is the King of all, the Lord of all. And he says in, is it Mark 10:45? It's the next one there. Mark 10:45. Even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. That's a characteristic of meekness. That is, now we would not read that and say, well, that's humility or that's gentleness, but that is meekness, is what that is an expression of. Let's go back to.
So far, this verse 19 seems to be the best explanation for meekness that I think I've heard.
Yeah, I like the verse, and there's several verses like that. Yeah, go ahead, Mom. Oh, you're on mute still.
You don't have to stop in mid-sentence.
Oh, that's okay. I just generally just repeat myself. So
I think that verse 19 is actually illustrated with verse 18. Paul's talking about how he's compelled to preach. And he says, "What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel, I may offer it free of charge, and so not make use of my rights in preaching it." Then he goes on and says, "Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone."
Yeah.
So he's not asserting his own rights above someone else.
Mm-hmm. He does the same thing when he talks about, doesn't he have the right to bring a believing wife along? But he's not doing it. Doesn't he have a right to demand them to pay for him when he comes? But he's not. He's building tents and selling tents, and it's the same thing exactly.
I didn't even remember that verse about bringing a believing wife along.
It's in chapter 9, verse 5.
Okay.
Steve, you were going to say something?
I was going to look back onto the Beatitudes and see where's the meekness. My Holcomb doesn't use it. Where is blessed are the meek?
I think it's verse 5. I'm just
Verse 5.
Off the top of my head, might be wrong.
It says that the gentle, here Holcomb says the gentle are blessed, for they will inherit the earth.
Yeah, that's
meek. But I still think you could substitute, those that are concerned about the betterment of others. That's different, and I think that's even better.
Yeah.
Gentle are blessed. At least it doesn't say the happy are blessed. That would really set me off.
Well, that would be redundant.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go back and look at Numbers 32, verse 32. See an example of Moses being meek, not just that he doesn't defend himself, but he does something else quite remarkable. Hopefully I have the right passage. Doesn't look like the right passage. Uh-oh, it's the wrong passage. Uh-oh. Let me find it because I need the right passage.
It's not 3232.
So Becky, while I'm looking for that, do you want to read your note? I think you're there you go.
So I was just saying that meekness has obviously been a discussion before, because I looked up the biblical definition and found it says biblical definition based on the various scriptures in which meekness is used. We can come up with a pretty good working definition of what it is. So no definitive. Meekness, according to the Bible, is being humble and gentle towards others and willingly being submissive and obedient to the Lord. It is not being selfish and arrogant, loud or obnoxious. So nothing that we haven't been discussing.
No,
I wouldn't have ever used obnoxious and loud and whatever.
Yeah.
Synonym for meekness.
It says not.
Not antonym.
Yeah, I think what he means is that seems to go without saying.
That seems to go without saying, doesn't it?
Well, James actually says that. If you look at chapter 3, 13 through 16 through 18, doesn't he say that when he contrasts the wisdom from below with the wisdom from above? Let me see. I'm still looking for that passage. You guys can go there and read it. Read the passage in James. Let's see. Sorry about this.
Well, I think James, he's kind of comparing it to wisdom.
No, well, I mean, yeah, I'll have to.
Just go ahead and find what you're looking for.
Sorry, what passage in James are we covering?
3:13 to 18.
Oh, that. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right. So I'll look at that, and then I did find the passage I should have guessed. It was Exodus, but had numbers written down. So that's twice I got numbers wrong. Just can't do anything perfect.
I wonder why.
Yeah. All right. So let's look at the James passage again real quick and see what James says about antonyms. So he's talking about wisdom, and he's talking about wisdom that's from above and wisdom that's from below. And he's saying the characteristics of these wisdom are this, that, and the other thing. And all of the characteristics for godly wisdom are summed up, I think, in the idea of meekness. And so he's contrasting meekness with, in verse 13, with bitter jealousy, selfish ambition. That's contrasted with meekness. Boasting, contrasted, or someone who would boast. And then he says that the contrast with meekness is earthly, unspiritual, demonic, jealousy, selfish ambition. So he's repeating that. The fruit of that is disorder and every vile practice. So, yeah, he is contrasting two types of wisdom, but the thing that he contrasts about them is their the motivation for them and the fruit for them. And the motivation of godly wisdom, depends on how you read the of, is meekness the thing from which wisdom comes, or is meekness the product of wisdom? Not, that's one of the questions that we would have just by the way the sentence is. But so anyway, I do think that the definition, the summary that Becky posted and having at the end there, it is not being selfish and arrogant, loud, or obnoxious. loud or obnoxious isn't mentioned, but selfishness is, and arrogance is close enough to that. And I can see loud and obnoxious being included. So anyway, I think James would agree with that, but I think there's a lot more to it. And again, that's a summary. Let's look at the right passage now, Exodus 32.
Excellent. How'd you find that?
Google the great Bible, Google the great Bible scholar. I just typed in what passage am I looking for, and it just showed up.
Where did I go wrong?
That's right. So the people sinned, which is not unusual. It's the golden calf. This was a really grievous sin. And verse 30, the next day Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people have sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you'll forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." But the Lord said,
Are you reading from Numbers?
Exodus.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I just put numbers in there to see who was paying any attention.
Yeah, I'm always a day late and a dollar short.
Well, when you had it pluralized, we figured it was okay,
Yeah, I figured it was all right.
Number again, we
Yeah,
know what's wrong.
there was no clue, no hint that it was the wrong reference. All right, so you know the story. Verse 32 again, "But now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." But the Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them." So what does Moses do here that shows others before self?
Saying, take me out instead of them.
Yeah. He says, if atonement needs to be made, let me be the sacrifice, basically.
Right.
And in case you're wondering, this King James Purple Letter Edition,
I was wondering.
anytime a word is in there that refers to the Lord, it's in purple, such as Lord or my, when it's the Lord is speaking, thou, thy. So if it's anything that's talking about the Lord, then it's in purple.
Ah,
So if the Lord speaking, and he says, "And repent of this evil against thy people." So the thy is in purple. Okay, you can rest easy now.
Now the mystery's been solved. Thanks for clearing that up, Don. Appreciate it.
Well, it's just so neat. I found something I've never seen before. Now, why this is important, I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I wonder what it says actually in their preface, their explanation for what they've done and why they think it is helpful. Probably was helpful for some people. So Moses says, Moses has no thought of self, but only thought of doing what the Lord has called him to do, which is to mediate for the people. And so the honoring of the Lord through the carrying out of what the Lord has called him to do is the priority. There are not two priorities. There is one priority, and it is, he doesn't have, we all think about this thing, oh, God, family, country, da da da. For Moses, it's God. There's no number two. No number two. God has said, care for these people. That's what I will do. And so his meekness is shown in this. It's almost like a self-forgetfulness. He sees his own life as a possible. I mean, he says, my life is given for the preservation of these people, for the carrying out of the thing that God has called me to do, to minister to them the best way that I can. And I will spend my life doing it. And it's no thought to personal pain or inconvenience. And so, and then you think about Jesus. Jesus says, I am meek. And you think, well, what made Jesus meek? Wasn't it exactly that, though? Exactly that. I will do what the Father has sent me to do, though it cost me. For the sake of the people the Father sends me to. And Paul has that same view, right? Exactly the same view. I will suffer anything that the gospel might be preached. There was one of the quotes that just, just jumped out at me, and I probably won't be able to find it. I don't think I'm going to be able to find it, but it was about in an argument, maybe I didn't put that one in here. Thought I did. That the person who is not meek is the person in an argument who gets frustrated and feels like they have to defend themselves, rather than, if you're in a discussion with somebody, the goal is to communicate to that person, which means that you would think about how is the best way to communicate to them the message that you're communicating. Yes, Mom.
I think that quote is on page 4. It's by Plummer. He who loses his temper in argument has begun to care more about himself and less about the truth. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. I don't see it on my page 4.
Well, it's the one that has this like box in the middle that says meek.
Yeah, I see that. Oh, I see
the
it.
Left-hand column.
I see it. There's no there's no space. There's no space, right? That's the problem. No space. Right. He who loses his temper in argument has begun to care more about himself and less about the truth. And I thought, ouch. Ouch. Right. So the meek person cares more about the truth, and ultimately then cares more about the other person being spoken to than they care about themselves, right? We especially when we're younger and we want to be apologists, we want to win the argument and we don't care about the soul. But the actual way to approach it is to win the soul, even if you lose the argument, right? It's not about personal vindication. Yes, Mom.
And we think that we are arguing righteously for the truth.
Yes. How what would James do with people like us, right? What would he say to us?
You're self-deceived.
Self-deceived. Yeah, that's demonic, right? It's to put to want to walk away thinking I won this argument, I showed them, right? And so the meek person doesn't do that. The meek person never even thinks about self. It's just a complete, I'm doing this for them. And that's the continual constant thought. And so it's not, they're never, why would there be, I mean, think about the contrast that James talks about, right? Selfish ambition and jealousy. Those are the contrasts. if you have no selfish ambition and no jealousy, I mean, I can imagine what that might be like. You would just be doing things for other people, for the glory of God alone, not for your own name, not for your own success or anything like that, but you would be doing it for the love of God and the love of others. And God gives you gifts and a mission field, and he says, go do this, and you would do it, and it wouldn't matter to you. The thing that would be important is that you would do it, not that it would be difficult. Yeah, Mom.
And if you get angry, it's because most likely you are frustrated. And what you're frustrated about is not being the one who is right.
Correct. And we rationalize, right? Even that. We don't want to, that's because that's ugly, right? You look at that and go, well, I'm frustrated because I'm not, he doesn't see that I'm right. I'm not getting, and so sometimes we try to sound humble and we say, I'm just frustrated with myself because I didn't communicate it very well, right? And we sound like we've got good motivation. There should be no frustration. There should be sadness for if the other person didn't receive the message, there should be sadness and prayer, not frustration. So we can see, when James starts talking about meekness and wisdom, and we look at some of these examples and we go, well, I'm just not like that. I maybe have been like that on occasion, but that's just not my normal default setting. But Jesus was like that. I mean, Moses was the most meek man who ever lived, but I bet Jesus was meeker. If that's a word. Is that a word, Gary? Meeker?
I think so. I don't think you have to say more meek. I think meeker.
Meeker? Maybe. So could there be a word like meekery?
Well, maybe it's a word like
Don't
pregnant.
push it.
Mockery, but there's not meekery.
Well, there's monkery. It could be meekery.
Monkery?
If you're mocking someone who's meek, I guess you say that's meekery.
Meekery. Yeah.
But that's a moot point when you're talking about Jesus, because you don't have to worry about whether it's meek or meeker, because it's meekest.
Meekest.
There you go.
The most
Right, you
meekest.
are,
Yeah.
Dave.
The
Way
most
meek.
he's the mostest meek. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we saw
You can
Moses.
see that. I just see that being used in a sentence as society was becoming meeker and humble.
Meeker and more humble. Yeah.
Homes were becoming more and more opulent.
Wonder what they mean by meek there.
Becoming more meeker. Well, never mind.
Yeah. So Paul does the same thing as Moses does, right? When Moses says, I would rather die than you slay them. Paul says the same thing in Romans 9. And I have the passage there, Romans 9:3. I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh. Now, he can't. He's not in charge of that. But his heart is, I wish I could do this.
Where did you just read from?
Romans 9:3.
What translation?
ESV, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very close to the Berean literal Bible is for I could wish myself to be accursed, separated from Christ for my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, and who is the divine adoption as sons, etc. I'm done.
Yeah. So we see the same attitude with Paul. And this is because the Lord changes his heart, right, from the proud Pharisee to the servant. He's now the servant of the Lord and the servant of all. And that's how he describes himself. And he means it when he says it. But that's by the grace of God. Let's look at Acts 20, 22 to 24. See a little bit more of Paul. And now, behold, I am going to Jerusalem, constrained by the Spirit, not knowing what will happen to me there, except that the Holy Spirit testifies to me in every city that imprisonment and afflictions await me. But I do not account my life of any value, nor as precious to myself, if only I may finish my course and the ministry that I received from the Lord Jesus to testify to the gospel of the grace of God. What has he just said?
It's all for God.
Says, I'm not afraid of what's going to happen to me, so long as I can continue to testify about Jesus.
Yeah, he said that. Yeah, he said exactly that. He said, you know, I've heard that it's going to be tough. The Holy Spirit is testifying to me and through the brothers that it's going to be tough. And I don't really care. You know, that's basically what he said. And so the Holy Spirit telling him it's tough is now for the benefit of the other believers, because now he expresses that's inconsequential.
Yeah, I know it. I know this going in.
Yeah, I know it going in, and it doesn't have any effect at all on my thinking. My thinking is I have a job from Christ. He by his grace gave me a job to do. And I will do it. And I will die trying.
Yeah.
You know, it's basically, you know, his it's like, you know, so meekness and affliction go together. The thing about Moses and Jesus and Paul is that when we see the examples of meekness, we see it in the context of suffering. Moses being, you know, attacked basically verbally by Aaron and Miriam. Moses, God had said to Moses, forget those Israelites, I make you a great nation. And because of the great sin of the Israelites. But of course, Moses has been called by God to be the mediator. And in this case, even in spite of what God might say to him, God has already told him to be the mediator. And so he says, Moses is like, well, hold on, I know that trick. I'm supposed to mediate. You know, you said you'd take these people for yourself. You said that I was supposed to be the mediator here. And if there's atonement to be made, I would rather die than them. And then God, you know, says, I'll punish them, but I'll still remain with them. All of the examples of meekness that we have affliction and suffering. And one of the things in the definition of meekness, in the much longer definitions that you know, I attached some of the, not every page of the definitions, but just some of the relevant highlights. But one of the definitions there in the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament is like, it's probably 5,000 words. It's a long definition. But one of the things that is always brought up is that there's affliction, and the affliction is, meekness shows itself when you are afflicted by you having the attitude, I will receive this from God, and I will do what he's called me to do. and I will receive from God everything as good. And so, and I thought it's particularly relevant to James's audience that James is using meekness because they are being afflicted. The rich are dragging them to court. The rich are, denying them their wages and defrauding them. And then internally, they've got a whole list of problems that is an entire page long. It's on the back of it's page 2, an entire list of things that are going wrong in their church where they're being self-destructive and all of that. They're in an afflicted state. And he's saying to them, this is wisdom. To say, God, you have arranged this. God, you have given to me. You have placed me here. You are good. And I will do what you've called me to do, which is to love my brothers and sisters and to pray for those who oppress me and to share the gospel. And the difficulties are not the things, the difficulties, I'm aware of them, but they're not of consequence. So, and that's what they need to do. And James, by saying to them, who among you is wise, he's lovingly kind of taunting them, kind of saying, there isn't any. There are none of you who are doing this. You need to mature. What you're doing instead is all of the earthly. Your concern is with your life on earth, your physical life, and your position in the church. It says that that's self-seeking, that is selfish and ambitious, and what that will do is tear the church apart, and that's demonic. So he says you have to give that up, right? So you have to go to God for wisdom. And he's back to that again from chapter 1. Go to God, get real wisdom. Everything that comes from God is good. James doesn't say this, but Paul says to the Corinthians, and he says, what do you have that you were not given? Well, if you were given everything, which is the answer to that question, and everything that God gives is good, then your attitude should be, thank you, God, for giving me this good. This affliction is good.
Yeah.
Right,
Brothers and
thank
sisters,
you. May I have another?
yeah, well, it's good. It's good for me, and it shows your glory when you change my heart so that I can deal with it.
Right.
Right? Because everybody wants to be, we don't want to just read about Paul and admire him. We want to be like that. Right? We want to be like Moses. We want to be conformed to the image of Jesus. And so, and what that takes is putting self-ambition aside, putting jealousy aside. What that means is that, and that's the consistent teaching in the New Testament, right? Don't look at other people who have spiritual gifts and say their gift is better than mine. Don't do that. Because every person has a place, and God has something that you can do and nobody else will do. And God has equipped you to do it, and he's called you to do it. And your concern should be to live the life God is calling you to live. The circumstances of your life are arranged by God so that you can turn them over to him and say, I want to live the life that you called me to live in these circumstances. But we're not to let the circumstances prevent us or change us. They don't enter into the consideration of doing the job, right? Doing the thing the Lord has called us to. So I really like this passage in Acts 20 where Paul basically says, I've been told repeatedly that it's going to be hard, and it's been really hard up to this point. And he doesn't even entertain the thought that perhaps maybe I should do something else. He's like, yeah, okay. He said, go do that. And he said, it's going to be hard. And you know what? It's hard.
Sorry. Huh?
This is another one of these passages that was omitted from the prosperity teacher's text, I believe.
They have a really short Bible. I think really it only has 15 or 20 passages in it. But
Almost
yeah.
Jeffersonian.
Almost Jeffersonian, except they're much more brutal, with their excising, I guess is the word. They're cutting out of texts. I mean, they didn't do it physically, but in their theology, they've only got a small handful of texts, and they interpret the entire Bible through a couple of texts. So then we look at Revelation 12:11. Let's look at that before we end. We're almost at 8:30. Revelation 12:11.
What's that?
Yeah, Revelation, right before maps.
No, that's Revelation. That's not pluralized, right?
It's not Revelations. It's not, although I have heard many people say that that's what it is.
Oh,
John was,
I think we hear someone that says that sometimes, don't we, Steve?
Yeah, Revelations.
yeah.
12:11.
12:11. What's it say?
Well, this is
Is
talking about he heard a great voice in heaven saying some things, and among the things that this voice said was, and they have overcome him by reason of the blood of the Lamb and by reason of the word of their testimony, and they have not loved their life unto death.
Right. So what translation is that?
This is called the Berean Literal Bible.
Okay. So I'm interested in just one word here that's in the ESV and not there. So I'm wondering about it in other translations. It's the word in the ESV, for. Here it is. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Does anybody have, what do you have there? Because the way it's written in the ESV is the reason they conquered is because.
Well, the NIV has a semicolon, which implies the for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mine has a semicolon as well.
Ah, okay. So the reason that they were able, that the early Christians were able to overcome the attacks of the devil, and they were to live by the word of their testimony and the blood of the Lamb, the reason they were able to is because they did not love their lives so much that they were unwilling to die. This is Moses. Okay, this is Paul. Right, this is Jesus. This is what the Father has given me to do. I will do it. He told me, spend my life doing this. I will spend my life doing this. And so they follow the Lamb, right, wherever he goes. That's the job. That's what Christians do. We follow the Lamb wherever he goes.
Mm-hmm.
And if he leads you to prison for preaching the gospel, well, that's where you go. And if he leads you, like with Peter, to be hung upside down, that's where you go.
Right.
You don't shy away because it's difficult. What you do is you decide by the grace of God that the glory of God is the thing that is priority. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this is part of meekness, and it doesn't come across with any English word, right? Meekness doesn't really come across, gentleness, humility. But when we look at the biblical examples of meekness, what we see is this, what I've just read in Revelation 12:11. They don't love their lives so much as to shrink from death. They say, I'll do it, whatever. They're not reckless. They're just not willing to sacrifice the thing that's the most important. And what is the most important? Pleasing the Father. Hearing on the final day, well done. That's the thing that's important. So it's a really, really high calling. And James says, to think otherwise is to be foolish, right? And to be selfish. And that's demonic. He says that isn't godly at all. And so we've only got like in the first 3 inches of the outline, but really great word. I mean, so challenging. So we'll continue in the outline next week. Probably we'll finish it because we're not going to look at everything in the outline. But if there are quotes that you read that you thought, well, I want to talk about that, bring them up, because there's some really good stuff in there. And that's why I attached it, because I thought this is so good. I don't want to just summarize it. I thought I'll just give it to you. You can look at it.
TWOT.
Theological word book of the Old Testament. It's in the first footnote on page 1.
Oh, there it is. I was looking for it. I saw the footnote, but I didn't get to read that many words to it.
Yeah. So that's the standard abbreviation. If you see that in any of your reading, TWOT, and that's what's being referred to. You don't think you'll see that? You might see it.
No, I said I wouldn't say that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So,
I would use the letters.
Use the letters. And if you haven't read some notes on the circumstances on page 2, you should read that, because they're being called to be wise and meek in that situation. And it's fun. You probably all know how to do this or have done this before, but if you just inductively go through the book, meaning you just read it and you think, I'm going to write down every verse that addresses the circumstance of the original readers and what they were going through and what they're like. And then you write down every characteristic with the verse next to it, and then you come out with kind of a profile. And what I thought that the church in Corinth was pretty messed up, but these guys are not that. They're not that fabulous either. They're just
Which
like
guys?
The guys that James is writing to.
Oh.
They have all kinds of things going on that he addresses. And the only reason he would address these things is because they're problems, right? So they're the types of things that we all deal with. And so their church doesn't really look that different than most churches in the problems that are being expressed. They're all interpersonal. They all come from self-assertion and pride and ambition, that kind of thing. So wisdom, meekness, that would help a lot.
You brought up something that being crucified upside down.
Yeah.
And I've been pondering how that would affect the effectiveness of killing someone that way. We know that when you're right side up, your chest is not tied to the cross, so your body kind of leans forward and puts pressure on your chest to where I suppose you suffocate.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're upside down, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, there's a whole different set of physical problems, right? I think all the blood going to the head is going to probably mean you pass out pretty early. And I still think you would probably end up suffocating anyway because of everything still going down, the gravity. Harder to push yourself back up with your arms in that angle than it would
Mhm.
be with your legs. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Arms
both
get tired real quick.
both ways are just terrible.
Yeah.
So, well, on that cheerful note, I think we should end.